So last time we finished talking about your experience going on the Death March, and then we just started talking about Ravensbruck. Right now we're going to rewind, and you'll tell us a little bit more about the ghetto, and then when we're done, we're going to go back and continue from Ravensbruck. Okay?
That's great because I did not add in the ghetto. I said that the ghetto was quite colorful. And by colorful, I don't mean carnival or joy or thing. But nevertheless, there were the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there was the commandant who, first of all, there were the people that lived in Bosnia from before the war. They were the residents, and they were respected more. Then there were the people that came, that the Germans brought in from destroyed little town shtetls, and the farmers, Jewish farmers, sort of a little bit peasant, not quite as educated, but good people, nice people. And there was a ghetto A and ghetto B. Ghetto A were the people that work, and they felt a little more secure. Then there were the ghetto B where they didn't work and they starved because we got bread. They didn't. So they lived in terrible poverty. It was super. On the other hand, there was a young man, and he dressed sort of German style with jotvers, a jacket, a jacket put, a coat put over the shoulders, because that's how Germans used to wear their coats, which was nonchalant. He wore boots, which was difficult to get in the ghetto. How he had I don't know. He was a good-looking young man, and he picked two sisters, the most beautiful girls in the ghetto. One was blonde and black-eyed. One was dark-haired and blue-eyed, which was an unusual combination for a Jewish girl. And they were extremely, extremely beautiful. And he would walk holding on to the two girls on both sides. He also had a switch the way the Germans carried. And his name was, I think, I'm not too sure, it was an unusual name for a Jewish or Polish name. I think he was Fernando. And like a lover kind of type. And he would stroll the main street of the ghetto, and everybody looked after him, and everybody looked through the ghetto. And just my cousin, who was marriageable age, went out. Somebody made a match with a lawyer, and she got dressed up very well and walked just on the main street with thousands of people. And still, it was a date on the street. There were no restaurants, of course, in the ghetto. But still, she was dressed well. He was dressed well. By the way, this man somehow, he didn't pick my cousin, but he found another girl, and somehow he was able to escape and survive the war. And I met him in Czechoslovakia after the war, and there was a touch of regret, not jealousy. I was glad that he survived, but yet I felt, had he gone with my cousin, then she would have been saved. And at that point, I didn't have any of the family. So that's what made, and children were running. Some children were like urchin, they would steal food to sustain themselves. And sometimes they were beaten up by the people because food was scarce. And there was specifically one boy, he came with his grandfather. The grandfather was very old. He stayed in my aunt's house also. And the boy, he must have been maybe 7 years old, but he knew how to take care of himself. He was beautiful, black-eyed, black hair. He was the most beautiful, and olive complexion. His name was Kuba. And he was an amazing kid, always very dirty because he stayed in the garden and went to every hole. He slept by my aunt under the staircase with his grandfather. And my mother once in a while would take him, scrub him up, put clothes that my brother grew out of, and dress him, and he looked like a prince. And he was happy about it. He had a smile when they showed him a mirror. And 5 minutes later, he went on the street and everything was in tatters. He ripped everything. But that's what made it somehow, what made the ghetto colorful in my eyes. At that point, I was 10, 11 years old or something. So I was myself still a child. And I found it, there was still a dressmaker. My mother would take an old dress that she found, gave it to the dressmaker for the piece of bread. The dressmaker would make a dress to fit me so I wouldn't look like a beggar child. So it was still important to have that dignity. My mother baked bread, which she never did anything before the war. She didn't do much. She kept the house, but we had someone to help. But in the wartime, in the ghetto, she would bake bread. So we had bread, and she also sold some to buy potatoes or whatever, or bribe someone. So it made the ghetto sort of livable and colorful. And of course, there was Benny, who I talked about, who saluted me in his uniform, and I standing by a fence on a bench by the fence, and with the cherry tree next to me. So there was something still. We were hoping if we can live like that, we'd gladly work and just live and somehow manage. But and then I met in the ghetto B a young boy, and he was extremely poor. He took me once where he lived, and he lived like in a hall, actually in a hall. It wasn't even a room, and it was there were a lot of people in that place, and it wasn't fresh smelling, and it was quite messy with all the people. And he was very, very embarrassed because I lived in by my aunt, and it was still kept nicely, that my room. So there was such a mixture, and he made a book out of cutting out a story in a newspaper. The newspaper ran a story every week, a new story. So he couldn't afford to buy a book, so he would cut out the page and make a book. And I still remember it was about Shabtai Tzvi, the false prophet. But it was a very interesting book. And my whole family, like one I finished the book, then my mother took it, then my brother took it. than my father. And he was a very sweet boy. I can't remember. I wish I could remember his name to sort of let people know that he existed, and he was amazing. In his poverty, he was still an amazing boy. So I just wanted to recollect the ghetto a bit. And there was that commandant, and he wrote, and he shot at his will, but he was also bribed. And so he wasn't like the worst. We were able to live somehow, if they let us live, of course.
So now, thank you.
So we are back in Ravensbruck
Yes.
already.
Yes.
So that's quite a lot of time went by, and each time, as I said, it was worse and worse. And in the Ravensbruck, as I said, I was all alone. I said, they brought us, the snow was all melted black because there were so thousands of people treading on it. And there were no barracks, empty barracks, and I sat outside in the cold, in that mud, in that muddy snow, and hardly dressed. And from that march, which took a long time, and hungry, I had a little piece of bread, which I didn't eat, and I kept it, remembering that my mother said, you need to keep it for next day. So I tried to follow my mother's advice, although she wasn't there. She guided me somehow. And then one day, there was like an opening in the barrack, which were the housing for us. And when I came in, there was no place on the bunks. So I sat on the floor, which was also very muddy from people treading on it. And I just sat, I leaned against a bunk on the floor, and I suppose I fell asleep. I dozed off. And when I woke up, that piece of bread was gone. Somebody stole it. It was in a pouch. But all of a sudden, I heard a voice. A woman was walking across the bunks. The bunks was one next to the other. So it formed like a platform. The top formed a platform. And she was walking from bunk to bunk to bunk. And she noticed me. And she called out in German, a little mouse, which was an endearing name for a child. She said, little mouse, what are you doing down there? Come, you can sleep with me in my bunk. So she took me, she spoke in German, and at that time I still spoke some. So I went to her bunk. There was also another woman in that one little bunk, which was very narrow. It wasn't, was it maybe as big as a small bed. What are they? Twin bed, like not even as big. So the three of us stayed. She turned out to be German, incarcerated as a prostitute. And she was pregnant, and she asked me to sing her lullabies to fall asleep, which was bizarre. I was really dressed very shabby, some tatters. She was a little better dressed. She was cute, a small, blunt young woman. And she struggled. not quite as badly as we did, but nevertheless, and here in the hunger, in the way we slept, the way we lived, I had to sing to her lullabies and shake her, shush her, shush her. She wanted me to shush her. She missed family, and she didn't know. I don't know if she thought of her future, but she was German and not as afraid as we were. But anyway, Ravensbrück was like a terrible, terrible camp. At one time, they brought a group of Polish women uh, after what did you call? They went against the German. What was the uprising? The Polish uprising, and so they brought people into Ravensbrück. So the women came, but they were Polish women, not Jewish, and we were Polish but Jewish, but they were Polish Christian, and they were allowed to bring food. So they had bread, and the first time in my life, I went over and to the women, and I was begging for food. For food, we were starving, but I did share it with the German woman because I felt she was so nice to me. So I shared it with her. So that was Ravensbrück. The worst. There were lice. There were lice. I went to wash in icy cold water because I remembered my mother said, you need to keep clean. You need to watch for lice because they brought typhoid. So I stripped my clothes, washed them in that cold water and held them to dry. But it was a very bad camp. And one day I passed, it was a sunny day, and I saw a line of people, and I didn't know what they were lined up, if they were giving out food or whatever, and I felt whatever happens, or if they were going to die, they were going to death. But at that point, I didn't really care which one it was, and I joined that group, that line, and we were taken to a train and brought to another camp. The other camp was Malhof. In Malhof, somehow they separated teenagers from the older people, not old, from whoever was there. They separated us and gave us a barrack just for the teenagers. And we became friends and helping each other. As a matter of fact, it was by that time we left Auschwitz January 18th, and in Malhof, it was quite the beginning. It was already Passover, and one of the girls decided she's making a Passover Seder. And some woman that knew me asked me where my mother is, because whoever knew me, whoever survived, knew me sticking with my mother. And she said, where is your mother? And I told her she was gone. And she said, she gave me a potato. So I brought the potato to share, a raw potato. And one of the girls sliced it very thinly, and that became the matzo and the food and everything. And she soaked the potato in water, and that we pretended it was wine. Somebody found salt that was put on pipes to not let them freeze. And she knew how to cleanse the salt. And we made salt water. So we pretended, they made us say that. And we tried to help each other in some ways. And of course, the Germans, by that time, the Germans were doing poorly, which we had no idea. But at one point, they said that we'll have to leave. Actually, the beginning when we came in was interesting because the commandant, the German commandant of that camp, he seemed nice man. But when we came, we sat in one room. That was right on the beginning when we just came into the camp. He said, you'll go to a shower. At the word shower, we balked because Auschwitz shower was the gas chamber. So he had a smile on his face. He just understood why we balked, why we got scared. And he said, no, don't worry, it's a real shower. And we went to the shower, and the warm water was just amazing. It was just wonderful. And our not only dirty bodies, but worn out bodies that warmed, and in the winter. And one of the girls had a little tiny piece of soap, which actually men used to shave. How she got it? Well, she got it because she had a job in Auschwitz. So she was dressed a little better than us, and she became my close friend, and eventually we shared a bunk. So she gave me the soap to soap myself up, and it was just amazing. But so this camp was not too bad, and all of a sudden we got a package from Switzerland or from Sweden, from the Red Cross from Sweden probably. Of course, most of the good stuff the Germans took for themselves, but they gave us, there were some crackers, something was in there. And it was like a blessing because we were stuck. At that point, there was very little food. The Germans even didn't have enough food. And outside of our camp, the Germans, somebody found out from the Germans that when we'll leave the camp, when they'll take us out, they will dynamite the camp. So people would not stay and hide. And the same thing happened in Auschwitz. That's why we went on the march, which we should have hid because the Germans did not have time to destroy Auschwitz. But anyway, there was another camp where Italian prisoners from Italian partisan were kept, but they were not killed. They were dressed well. They used to, through defense, we could hear them singing Italian love songs and whatever. Sometimes they would come up to our fence and like give us a little courage. And I remember at one time before the war's end, before we went on the march, one of them came over. He said, don't worry, if we'll hear anything that's happening to you, we'll break into the camp and we'll save you. So that was like a little bit hope. But then the Germans took us out, and that was another march. And on that march, I don't know how many people died. That is somewhere in the statistic. which eventually you'll need to find out. But on that march, we went through fields, and the fields were strewn with soldiers, German, American, English, whatever soldiers, Allied soldiers, German soldiers, laying just dead. The bodies very black, and it was a gory scene because the grass was so green and the forests were alive, and here you just saw the bodies and you saw the destruction of the war. But we walked like that, and all of a sudden a civilian passed by, not riding the bike, but holding onto it and wheeling it. And he was in civilian clothes, and somehow we recognized him. He was the commandant of our camp. And he said, look, because our guards ran away, because they couldn't keep us going that quickly, and they were afraid of the Russians coming. So they were going toward the American army. They would surrender to Americans. They didn't want the Russians. The Russians were quite barbaric, actually, because they struggled a lot, and the German did awful things to them. And so they wanted vengeance. And so the Germans were running away from them. And so the guards ran away, and we were in a field, and there we saw that man passing by, recognized our commandant, and we got a little frightened that he'll give us out. Yeah. But he said, just hide, because another group led by the Germans is following. If they'll find us, they will take us into the group and we'll walk. So we were hiding in a ditch, and then we just started walking. We saw an American car, tried to get on it, but they wouldn't let us. It was an army. There were a lot of people, so they wouldn't let us. So we just walked, and slowly we saw the German army surrendering. They put on their rifles, their guns in one pile. There were still snipers in the ditches hiding. The Germans fought to the last man. That's what Hitler told him, and they followed. So the snipers were still dangerous, but somehow we were a group, a few girls, maybe 5 girls. Somehow we survived that march and came into the town and in Germany, and that town was already taken over by the Russian and some Polish army. And the Polish army said they're making the next day a show, like for victory, to proclaim victory. And we were invited. So we went the next day, and it was so bizarre because we were so ragged and so starved. And here there were the Polish soldiers, all dressed up in uniforms, and soldiers. The whole auditorium was full of soldiers, and we watched the show. So here there were still German snipers, German surrendering, and the Polish people giving out a show. It was like the liberation was so bizarre that it's hard to describe how we felt. And we were still all alone. hoping that we'll find someone from the family, but knowing that there won't be anyone. And then we came across a Russian convoy, and we asked them if they were going to Poland, and we asked them would they take us back to Poland. As I said, hoping maybe we'll find someone. And they took us in, but the Russians were dangerous, sexually dangerous. They started up with young girl. They were in the army for many years, fought, and I suppose that was nature, the nature of that. They were a bit shell-shocked also, and not as cool as American, not quite, but they struggled a lot. They were good. They fed us. They gave us food. And actually, one of the soldiers went to a German house and brought me shoes. I had no shoes. So he brought me 2 different shoes. But as long as I had something on my feet. And we came to Poland, to a town. We didn't know, we were starved, totally starved. That was already liberated by the Russians. And we saw someone that looked somehow Jewish, also ragged. So we assumed he came from a camp. We asked him, where could we go to get something, to get somewhere to lay down, to get some. So we went, he told us where to go. There was already an organization. I don't know where these people come, if they came earlier from different camps, which were liberated earlier, but they formed a group, an organization to supposedly help. But anyway, we came, we told them we are hungry, we need somewhere, a place to lay down. And they said, well, what do you expect? That we'll put you in a cotton and we'll carry you like babies? He said, we have no food and we have no place where to put you up. So we walked out and we found another man. He said, you know what? There is a man, he's a tailor. He came earlier. He was liberated earlier. He got an apartment. He has an apartment and he's good-natured. Go to him. So the 5 of us, I think it was 5, went up to him and he took us in. He had some bread. He had bread, I don't know what else. And he said, you're going to sleep over on the floor. He put some blankets on the floor. So we had a place we had something to eat, made something to drink, I don't remember what. Didn't have much, but he had, because he found his sewing machine before he left. The town was, by the way, Lodz, which had eventually a very big ghetto. It was a known town in Poland. And before he was sent out to a camp, he took his sewing machine and buried it underground. So when he was liberated, when he came back, of course his family was gone. He had, at that point, when we met him, he was 30 years old. He lost a wife and 3 children, 3 babies. So he came with 3 friends from a camp, and they stayed together, and they had an apartment, and they were sewing, exchanging their work for some food, for bread, for an egg, for whatever the Polish people would give. And he kept us. And then slowly, my friends found some relative. There was a twin, two of the girls were twins. They were actually in Auschwitz with Mengele, and they survived. They survived in Auschwitz, and they also went on that march. But so they found a brother in the Russian army. It just by coincidence, by chance, that they found him, because the Russian army was gigantic, and there was a Polish army, but they found the brother. So they went with the brother. Another girl found no, that wasn't a twin, that was one girl. She went with her brother. The twins found a sister, so she took them wherever she stayed. By that time, she had a room. And we found a room eventually. We did not stay by that man all the time. But there were a few men, but he was like the main. He was the one that led, that told the men what to do, how to survive, how. And so the room we got through a Russian soldier. He found us a room because it was hard to get. So many people were coming back. And comparatively, very few, but for that, what they expected was quite a bit. So then everyone slowly found someone. My best friend, the one that took me in Malhof to stay with her bunk, she found brothers, two brothers that survived. She went to them. So I was all alone. And this man, his name was Monique Urbaitel. And he said, well, you know what? You'll stay with me. You'll be my child. And he was only 30. I was by that time 15, probably going on 16. And I stayed with him. And he made me a skirt, he made me a blouse. So he bought me a pair of shoes. It was hard to get things at that time. Poland didn't have much. And they had plenty, because they took from the Jews everything. But it was hard to get it, because they kept it. So I stayed with him. In the meantime, he got married. He had a girlfriend, and she would come and she would cook, actually, help a bit. And she found brothers. So they had a big apartment, also in Lodz. But she would come and visit her fiancé. And so he kept me, and then they got. In the meantime, I was still with the girls. One of the girls found out that in Krakow she might find her brother. So we all went to Krakow, and someone recognized me there, and he told me, your aunt and her daughter survived, and they are in Bochnia. And I went there, but my aunt did not greet me very well. She just sort of resented that I came, and so I decided to stay with the girls, and I went back to Lodz. So he kept me, and I stayed with him for probably 9 months or whatever. And in the meantime, he got married. And they expected a child. And one day he came over and he said, look, you have to make some decision what you want to do with your life. And I didn't go, I wanted to go to school because the twins, they were from Lodge, and the sister managed to sign them up in school. And she got them uniforms, and they came. And Monique said, look, they're going to school and they look nice in their uniforms, and you're just doing nothing. And I felt terrible. And the thing was that I told the twins, if your sister will get you to school, please sign me up. Because I had no idea how to sign myself up. And one day they came in their uniforms and they told me they signed up, and I was hurt. And I said, why didn't you take me? Why didn't your sister take me? And they said, well, you can't expect, it costs money, and you can't expect Monique to pay for you. After all, you're not his family or nothing. I don't know. I suspect later on it came to me that maybe they were jealous because Monique liked me. Monique really replaced his children with me. And he really cared for me. And I remember when I went to sleep, he would make sure he covered me so I would be warm. He really took care of me. And I had a coat from the camp, which had, they put on the back a painted like a X. So if we ran away, we would be recognized that we are runaways. So he took the coat, being a tailor, and turned it around, the left side out. So he made me a coat, which in those years was a treasure. And everything was a treasure, whatever we got. So anyway, he came over and he said, look, we're expecting a baby. You just staying here, you're sort of wasting time. You didn't go to school. And I was embarrassed to tell him why I'm not going to school. I didn't want to tell him that they didn't sign me up and that I didn't want to ask him for the money for it. So I didn't say anything. So then he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I guess I'll go to my aunt. And so he wasn't quite well. The war affected his lungs or something. So he went, and he made by that time sewing, being a tailor. He made some money. He was well dressed. I should have had a picture of him. I have a picture of him. And so he said, the doctor suggested he goes to a place where it's easier, it's for the lung, a cure for the lungs, the air, the water, whatever. So he decided to go there. So he said, I'll take you to your aunt and you'll stay, and I'll go on to the place, to the spa where I'm going. And many, many years later, actually we were already in America. We went to visit friends, and I found out he was in France. Somehow, I don't know who told me that eventually he left Poland with his wife, with his child, with his wife's family, brothers that were survived, and they went to France. And we were passing a town that sounded familiar. And I said, I think that's where he lives. That somebody told me, mentioned the name. And so my husband walked over to by that time I was married. My husband walked in the store and asked for the name, and it was spelled differently in France. So he said, "Oh, the poor man is dead." And I burst out crying, and I told my husband, "Let's leave the town, let's leave the town." But then my husband just kept insisting and wrote out the name. And the man said, "Oh, it's Urbaitel, not Urbastel." So he said, "Yeah, he's alive, he's here, he's a tailor, everybody loves him." And we went to him, and when he saw me, he didn't recognize me because by then I was already married. Years passed by, and he hugged me. I thought that he'll break all my bones, my ribs. That's how he hugged me. Everything came back probably to him, and he said, "I never forgave myself for letting you stay with your aunt. I should have kept you." And but it was as it was. So that's how it ended. In from Lodge, I went to my aunt. I stayed with my aunt. One day she came. She went to a bigger town, to Krakow, and she came back and she said, "There's a rabbi who is taking out, excuse me, who is taking out children from Poland." Poland was very anti-Semitic. They killed some Jewish people that came back from camp. So they were trying to save whatever children were left. So she said, "I signed you up." I really didn't want to go because I traveled enough. I was by myself enough. I would have liked to stay with my aunt, but she signed me up, and I went. I joined the group. I think the rabbi's name was Rabbi Herzog, and there was a Polish officer, and he smuggled us through the border from Poland to France, a group of youngsters, and eventually we wound up in France, in Strasbourg, Alsace, and we stayed there for quite a while. They taught us. They were not teachers, but they taught us some Hebrew. They taught us some English, but they were not teachers. So it was really, we were vegetating. We were growing up. By that time, I was already probably 18 years old, and whatever. I made friends with my future husband. We were friends, and he used to help us with homework because he picked up very quickly. And one day somebody came to our room. We were 10 girls in a room. The whole house, it was called a Kinderheim, the children's home. So eventually, we stayed there. We were about 100 kids. The boys were on one floor, the girls were on another floor. It was very, very well kept, as well as possible, but we didn't learn or anything. And so one time somebody came that there is a way to go to Palestine. Would I volunteer? And I said yes. And I volunteered. The other girls didn't. I was the only one from that room. There were another from the other room. There were another few girls. And some of the boys, my future husband also joined, which later on I found out that he wanted to join me. And because his parents were in France. They survived the war in Russia, the whole family, brother, sister, the parents, everybody survived in Russia. And so they came to France, and so why am I saying that? I'm mixing up things. So anyway, he told them that he's an orphan. He denied that he has parents and volunteered. And we went on the Exodus, which was quite a famous illegal ship. The Exodus 1947, Tashas, Exodus Tashas. And there were 4,500 people. We were taken in France to Marseille, to a port where we waited for the ship. The ship was bought by the Haganah, a small ship that carried 500 people, like a luxury ships that travel on the Mississippi, gambling, and whoever watched Western knew the ships. Anyway, the Haganah put in bunks throughout all the fancy things that they had inside, put in a very good motor, found a sailor who was 29 years old, a youngster actually, and he was the captain. He was the only one that knew how to maneuver a ship. He turned out to be excellent. And a small young man. And so they brought people from German DP camps and our group of 100, and we made 4,500, and we were put on that boat which took 500 people originally, and we all squashed. We had to take a bottle of water and just a tiny package, a comb, a brush, a pajama, something like that. That's all. And after 3 months, we stayed in Marseille for 3 months in a house, in a pretty nice house across the Mediterranean. We had quite a nice time.
How old were you?
At that time, probably 17, 18, something. No, I was younger. It was 17, because the Exodus was 1947, so I was about 17, 16 going on 17 still. And so finally, when the boat came, we were the boat had a hard time because they brought it from America, and they came across a hurricane, and it was almost destroyed, the boat. But sometimes they were able to take it back, and they refitted it, made it stronger, brought it back again to Marseille. And there's a great book by Anne Gruber, which all the young people should read, how the Exodus sailed, how and then the English ships took us. So we sailed, we were in the middle of the Mediterranean, 5 miles from at that time Palestine. We were accosted by 11 English warships, and we were attacked, and we fought back. Cans of tomatoes, potatoes, whatever cans we had, we would throw at them. Someone said that we had some hot oil, like in the olden times. and we wouldn't let the soldiers board the ship, and we fought for 3 hours because the idea was that we would get the ship within 5 miles of Palestine, which becomes territorial water. And then we would get in Tel Aviv. In Tel Aviv, the Haganah got a group of 70,000 Jewish people, and waiting for us. We were supposed to get off the boat would be beached, taken on the sand, never to be used again, because no boat can go on land and be pulled back. But they didn't care about the boat. So we were supposed to just get off very quickly, mix with the 70,000 people, and disperse. This way the English wouldn't find us. But they started fighting with us 5 hours before the territorial waters and 5 hours before Palestine. So we fought for 3 hours. We held out, we didn't let them in. Finally, they started shooting. And a boy was killed. I don't know, 1 or 2. By the way, on that Exodus, a woman gave birth to a baby. The woman died in childbirth, but the baby survived. And when we reached Palestine, the English let the father and the baby get off. But we were shot at, and 200 Marines, which were American volunteers, actually, they were wounded. And the captain said, I didn't bring 4,500 people to be slaughtered after all what they went through after the war. I don't want them slaughtered. And he gave up to the English. So they came on our boat. Of course, the captain had to hide. He just came up with us together with the whole group, put on a cap upside down and like a kid. He was like a youngster, 29 years old. And the English took us off and put us on 3 boats that carried freight, like, I don't know what you call those type of boats, not passenger boats. And so they separate us, 1,500 on each boat, and they were taking us back. And they thought if they'll bring us back to France, that we will disperse. But we didn't. We said we belong in Palestine is our land. Palestine is Israel. It belongs to us. We had kings here. We lived here. This is our country. This is our promised land. And we did not sway from that. So we would not get off. We staged a protest. We would not get off the ship. French government told the English that they will take us in, but they will not force us off the ship, of the boat. So they took us. So we were on the waters for 3.5 months. And finally, they took us to Germany, to the English zone. And we were quite stuffed. They gave us crackers, which were from World War II. They had worms and whatever. But you're hungry, you eat whatever. You're given some little soup, a group of 10 people, and we all ate from one little bowl. There wasn't much, but we were young. For young people, it's an adventure. If we wanted to spite the English, we would sing the Hatikva. And that scared them because they thought that we were rebelling. By the way, the bottles that we had for water, we had to give them because they were afraid that we will use it as a weapon. So eventually everything was taken away from us, the little things that we had. And we stayed. On the English boat, we traveled for 3.5 months, never touching land. And finally they brought us back to Germany, to the English zone. In there, they could force us to go down because it belonged to the English. And so our boat had a dynamite, explosive on it. The Haganah were planning to let us off. We should get off quickly. They didn't want to kill us. It was not really a suicidal mission, although one of the Haganah men, his name was God, he said that he will stay with that explosive and set it so to make sure that everybody got off, not to injure anybody from the passengers. But we all voted against that. We did not believe in suicide, and because that was suicidal. He didn't want to get killed, but that was the only way to save us. But we all said that no, he must live with us. So they told us to leave quickly the boat, and somehow the other boats were protesting and they were fighting the English. They didn't want to get off, and the English became suspicious. Why do we get off so easily? And they took the boat out of the harbor to some remote place. They found the explosive, and it would have just destroyed that whole boat with the soldiers and all that, which would have been a sort of revenge on it. But we wound up back in France, and then they took us back to Germany to a camp, and we were waiting illegally to get back to Palestine. And finally, my friend, who later on became my husband, he said, you know what? I have enough travels and all that. I am going to my parents to Paris, and if you want to join me, please do. So at that point, they sent already quite a few of our group to Palestine, and there were left a few young men, and I was a bit afraid of them. After the war, I'm short now, and then I was still a youngster and more small and frail, and I was somehow afraid of them. And I decided to go with my friend there. His Hebrew name was Menahem. He was renamed in America Max, but he liked his name Menahem. And I went back with him to Paris, and he took me to his parents, and I stayed there. They gave me a room with an old lady and had children. And eventually we got married and lived in France for a while, and then we emigrated to America, and where we built a wonderful family. You have a picture. You can show the picture of my children. And there's another picture which is better. Daniel, can you show Ricky? Yeah, this one. And so we built a family for children, grandchildren. Now I have great-grandchildren. So it's sort of like we still, as a nation, did not come to the number of people, or to the number of Jewish people that were before the war. But nevertheless, Exodus created Israel because the world spoke up that people have no place where to go. The refugees from the wartime have no place where to go. And this is my house. Pen around the room, how it looks, and it's old by now. Everything is ancient. My husband is gone, and I live here alone. Old age is difficult. I still write little stories from the past, and now it's becoming a little more difficult. Apparently, you become more sensitive, more touchy at old age or whatever. And my achievement is building up a nice family. They're good children, good people, married, good people, and the grandchildren are great. My little great-granddaughter, they called me Gigi, great-grandma. So Gigi, she told me, Gigi, I learned how to bless the candles. She's 5 years old. She's, let me show you the picture. So she's learning how to bless the candles. She's going to a Hebrew school. And show me this picture. Let's show them. This is how I looked right after, like about maybe not quite a year after the war. And this, my hair, since it was shaved in Auschwitz, that's how it grew in by that time. It was never touched again till much later.
All right, so thank you. We're going to spend a whole nother video to talk about your life now, because I know you mentioned in the beginning that you wanted to tell us about your life now and not just your backstory. So we're going to do that soon.
So that we